Clint Eastwood accomplished an unprecedented feat at the age of 94. His 42nd film was directed by him, his finest achievement in a decade, according to critics. However, in the background, music was grappling with a loss that fundamentally altered his life. His longtime companion had recently passed away without warning. Later, his son, Music, stated that he was doing well. However, the remarks were cautious. Then, a peculiar interview ensued, which Eastwood himself characterized as entirely fraudulent. Something more profound was transpiring, and the revelation of the truth elucidated the reason why this may be the final communication from him. Clint Eastwood was born in San Francisco on May 31, 1930. His girth was the first thing that individuals observed. He weighed 11 pounds and 6 ounces. Consequently, the nurses referred to him as Samson prior to the completion of any documentation. Clinton Sr. and Ruth, his parents, relocated him to Oakland's Lake Merritt neighborhood in an effort to establish a secure existence, despite the fact that the Great Depression was constantly altering their plans. Initially, his father was employed as a bond salesman. However, he subsequently discovered a long-term career at Georgia-Pacific. His mother remained at home until the children reached adulthood, at which point she became a secretary at IBM. Clint was raised by his younger sister, Jean, and the family relocated from town to town in the 1930s in search of opportunities amid an economic downer. At the time, these initial changes were perceived as survival-oriented. However, years later, that narrative would be altered in a manner that no one had anticipated. For decades, Clint referenced poverty and articulated himself in a manner that was indicative of his upbringing in adversity. He embraced the narrative of a difficult adolescence that was influenced by the Depression. Afterward, Sandra Lockcatch, Music, who resided with him from 1975 to 1989, shattered that paradigm. She disclosed that the family ultimately relocated to Piedmont in 1940, which is considered one of the most affluent suburbs in Northern California. Their assets included a country club membership, a private swimming facility, and sufficient funds to enable each member of the family to operate their own cars. It was a surprise, as a mere handful of families in 1940s America owned even one vehicle, let alone multiple. Lacka stated unequivocally that they were never impoverished. The story Clint enjoyed recounting about himself was complicated by this truth. However, the contrast between teenage privilege and early uncertainty, Music, discreetly influenced his manner of navigating the world. Although he was surrounded by comfort, Clint continued to rebel against school throughout the entire process. He was primarily concerned with automobiles, girls, and beer, and he had little interest in anything else. In middle school, he was relegated to a full grade. As he enrolled in Piedmont High School in January 1945, his restlessness intensified. He was expelled within a year for a variety of reckless behaviors, such as scrawling an obscene message on the scoreboard, burning an individual in effigy, and pedaling his bicycle across a rain-soaked sports field until the grass was destroyed. He was already 6 feet, 4 inches tall, with lanky limbs, a ducktail hairstyle, and leather jackets by that time. He transferred to Oakland Technical High School for music and ultimately graduated on February 2, 1949. Throughout it all, the only subjects that truly captivated him were mechanical labor and music. The year 1949 was rendered even more significant by the relocation of his parents and sister to Seattle. At the age of 18, Clint elected to remain in California, prioritizing independence over comfort. While the family transitioned to a new life in the Pacific Northwest, he pursued employment opportunities in any available capacity. He was employed as a firefighter, a golf caddy, and a lifeguard, traversing Oakland, Music, and the surrounding areas without a defined course, but with an abundance of resolve. His decision to remain in California was precisely the right one for the events that were to follow. In 1951, he was conscripted into the Army and assigned to Fort Ord as a swimming instructor, a mere 2 years later. The initial spark of a Hollywood future was ignited by an almost incidental encounter with a Universal Studios employee on the base. The memories of all the earlier relocations remained with Clint, despite the fact that the Eastwood family had money by the time they reached Piedmont. The disciplined work ethic of his father was ingrained in him. He acquired knowledge from Ruth's transition from domestic to corporate clerk. He comprehended the ease with which stability could be lost and the effort required to maintain it. Long before he ever set foot on a film set, these nuanced lessons solidified his conviction in the importance of efficiency. He attributed his ability to shoot films swiftly, quietly, and under budget to the values he developed during the Depression years. Subsequently, he became renowned for this approach. Even though Clint himself never experienced the poverty he described in public, everything changed once more on September 30th, 1951, when he, now 21, boarded a Navy aircraft after visiting his fiancée in Seattle. He had worn his uniform to get a free military passenger transport. Music, something many soldiers did at the time. The Douglas AD-1Q Skyraider left Sand Point Naval Air Station and proceeded for California. What began as a routine transport turned into a fight for survival. Clint was serving stateside during the Korean War, working as a swimming instructor at Fort where he had never seen combat. Yet on that evening, his near-death experience emanated music from the sky rather than the battlefield. The aircraft's interior began to malfunction at 1825 hours. As a result of the radio system's failure, all communication was rendered unavailable. The pilot and passenger were left gasping as the altitude pressed down on them, as the oxygen system also failed moments later. Due to the malfunction of the navigation system, the pilot was unable to utilize his instruments to provide guidance as dense fog obscured the coastline. The intercom between the cockpit and Clint's seat was rendered inoperative. The fuel depleted more rapidly than anticipated, and the companion aircraft vanished into the haze. The pilot was compelled to abandon the aircraft in the frigid Pacific Ocean approximately 2 miles offshore when the Sky Raider reached the waters off Point Reyes, as the tanks were depleted. Clint and Lieutenant Francis Anderson were able to flee into the freezing water with just enough time to spare after the landing was rough but upright. They inflated 2 rafts and paddled away from the submerging aircraft, which plunged approximately 150 feet into the ocean and disappeared. Clint was left alone as he struggled to reach a feeble lighthouse light on the distant shore as the men were separated by strong currents. For nearly an hour, he rowed and swam through the frigid water, his body trembling and his arms burning. However, the sole alternative was to proceed. Upon reaching land, he wandered until he discovered the RCA radio station at Point Reyes. Afterward, the station operator reported that Clint appeared dazed and was scarcely able to speak. Years later, when Captain Chesley Sullenberger hesitated to authorize a film about his 2009 Hudson River landing, his decision was significantly altered when he discovered that Clint Eastwood had survived a comparable accident in 1951. Sullenberger's resistance was overcome by this mutual comprehension. Their connection enabled Clint to infuse the 2016 film Sully with an authenticity, music, that could only be comprehended by an individual who has experienced the sensation of frigid water enveloping their body. Clint's trajectory was also significantly altered by the accident, which was never anticipated by anyone. He was scheduled for overseas deployment to Korea prior to the incident. The investigation and subsequent medical evaluations resulted in delays, which were compounded by the time the music documentation was resolved. His deployment had been terminated. In that year, numerous youthful soldiers were dispatched and never returned home. Rather, Clint continued to serve as a lifeguard or at Fort for the remainder of his military career, utilizing the same skill that had preserved him in the Pacific. His subsequent films, in which he served as both actor and director, demonstrated a heightened awareness of mortality and risk as a result of that experience. He entered Hollywood without a map and with a meager amount of money after departing the Army. He excavated bathing pools, snorches. He operated garbage vehicles. He attempted to enroll in LA City College, but ultimately opted to concentrate on his acting career. His snorts roles were meager and uncredited, lasting only a few minutes in films such as Revenge of the Creature in 1955. Universal Studios terminated his employment entirely on October 23, 1955. According to executives, snorts, his pronounced Adam's apple, sluggish speech, and chipped tooth made him appear peculiar. He wandered through the industry for the subsequent 3 years, uncertain as to whether the door to acting would ever reopen. All of this changed in 1958 when Charles Marcus Warren cast him as Rowdy Yates in Rawhide Deed. Clint's initial consistent employment was the program's debut on January 9, 1959. He earned approximately $700 to $750 per episode at the outset. Although modest by contemporary standards, it was sufficient to alleviate his perpetual financial anxiety. There were millions of viewers who welcomed him into their living rooms every Friday night. His annual salary increased to approximately $100,000 as the seasons progressed. However, he continued to experience a sense of confinement. Rowdy Yates was forthright, loyal, and energetic. However, snorts. Clint was aware that there was more within him that was awaiting a role that would allow him to investigate it. Rawhide began to disintegrate in 1965. Eric Fleming and numerous ensemble music members were terminated by CBS that summer in order to reduce expenses. Although some believed Fleming had exaggerated his earnings, he publicly declared that he was earning $220,000 that year. Snorts. Clint was appointed as the new trail supervisor. However, CBS did not increase his compensation in any way. He was displeased and believed that the program had lacked a sense of momentum. The network then made a risky scheduling decision by moving Rawhide to Tuesday nights, where it confronted stiff competition. The series was terminated by CBS in December 1965 after only 13 episodes with Clint as the protagonist. Leaving a tragic shadow over the show's history, Fleming passed away on September 28, 1966, while filming in Peru. Clint nearly missed the opportunity that would transform his life, which renders this period all the more remarkable. Sergio Leone, an Italian director, requested his participation in a small Western filming in Spain during a break, music, between seasons 6 and 7. Clint was not particularly enthusiastic. He was preoccupied with golf and did not perceive the offer as having significant potential. The compensation was a mere $15,000. The director was unable to communicate in English. The film appeared to be more of an experiment than a career move. He primarily accepted the position due to his inquisitiveness. He was unaware of the extent to which this moment was on the brink of disappearing. Leone initially approached Eric Fleming regarding the music, but he declined due to his substantial earnings from Rawhide. Charles Bronson reviewed the script and declared it to be the most unappealing he had ever encountered. Richard Harrison also declined. However, he recognized Clint from a low-budget Western and recommended him. The history of Hollywood was altered by that single suggestion. A Fistful of Dollars was filmed in the vicinity of Madrid on a tight $200,000 budget. At times, crew members were not compensated and even removed the windows of the set in protest. The film released on September 12, 1964 in Italy and blew past every expectation, garnering $19.9 million worldwide. No one told Clint any of this until weeks later. He didn't recognize that a movie he approached casually had just reshaped his career. Success, music grew quickly. The second film, for a few dollars more, cost $600,000 to make and earned $15 million. Clint's salary increased to $50,000. When Leon prepared the final film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Clint hesitated again. The director nearly replaced him with Bronson, music, but Clint returned after being offered $250,000 plus 10% of the Western box office, music revenues. That film earned $38.9 million worldwide. And by the end of Music, the trilogy, he had transformed into a global sensation. Clint loved to reflect, music, on how easily he could have missed all of it. If he had chosen golf over that vacation to Spain, he might have remained a TV side character, earning $700 an episode. Snorts. Instead, the man with no name introduced him to audiences in a manner Rawhide never could. Snorts, his silence, his stillness, and the sharp expression in his eyes became his trademarks, a manner that influenced decades of cinema. By 1968, the figures explained everything. He earned $400,000 in music plus 25% of net proceeds for Hangam High, $750,000 for Where Eagles Dare, and $1 million for Coogan's Bluff. He transitioned from a salary of $15,000 to over $1 million per film in a mere 4 years. One of the most significant salary increases in Hollywood's history. Dirty Harry was released in theaters on December 23, 1971, and the scheduling alone caused anxiety among audiences. The Zodiac Killer, a genuine assassin who terrorized the region between 1968 and 1969, continued to loom over Northern California. Paul Music Stein, a cab driver in San Francisco, was fatally shot on October 11, 1969, marking the end of a sequence of at least 5 verified deaths. The Zodiac had inundated newspapers with taunting letters that boasted of murdering 37 individuals, despite the fact that the police could only confirm the deaths of 5. Investigators were left with no evidence by the end of 1971. No capture, no suspect, no name. Then, all of a sudden, audiences were seated in dimly lit theaters, watching a fictional police officer pursue Scorpio, a murderer who was evidently inspired by Zodiac. The film featured random violence and mocking messages to the press. The chill was a result of the knowledge that justice was swift on screen, snorts, whereas in real life, the city had been left impotent just 2 years prior. That discomfort was immediately transferred to the streets. When the 1971 Academy Awards were held, protesters, snorts, assembled outside with signs that read, "Dirty Harry is a rotten pig." The nation was already in a state of unrest. Kent State's massacres were only 1 year old. As the news was replete with accounts of entrapment, abuse, and corruption, trust in law enforcement was eroding as Vietnam tore the nation apart. During his appearances in the Bay Area, Clint Eastwood was brazenly hissed at, particularly by feminist groups. The film was criticized by critics for glorifying police brutality at the most inopportune of times. The outrage was not solely directed at a single film. It was associated with the ongoing controversy surrounding the 1966 Miranda versus Arizona decision, which mandated that law enforcement officers notify suspects of their rights. Conservatives maintained that it safeguarded offenders. Civil rights organizations harbored concerns regarding the potential for unbridled authority. Dirty Harry was actively involved in the collision. The term fascist virtually immediately followed the film. The scene at Kazar Stadium, where Harry shoots Scorpio in the leg and grinds his foot into the wound to compel information about an abducted girl, was the focal point of much of the music. Eastwood never refuted that the film violated Miranda rules. Harry conducts inquiries without a warrant. He tortures without reading the rights of the music. Nevertheless, the narrative prevents him from achieving victory. Harry responds with a straightforward inquiry regarding the girl's rights when the district attorney explains that Scorpio must be released due to the unlawful acquisition of the evidence. It is a harsh response. According to the district attorney, his office represents her, if Harry would permit it. In the end, Harry is entirely rejected by the establishment. The perpetrator is on foot. Harry discards his insignia. The film concludes not with a sense of triumph, but rather with a disgust for both the law and disorder. The inquiry regarding who represents victims struck a chord because the response was unsettling in 1971. Victims' rights organizations were scarcely present. The National Organization for Victim Assistance would not be established until 1975. The initial Rape Crisis Center in the United States was established in the same year as the release of Dirty Harry. Miranda versus Arizona was still recent, having been decided by a tight 5-4 majority in 1966. Congress had previously attempted to weaken it with a 1968 law, but it was unsuccessful. Harry's inquiry revealed a genuine deficiency in the system when Scorpio demanded a $200,000 ransom while an adolescent girl was suffocating underground. While organized advocacy for victims was still years away, the law prioritized safeguarding the accused. The controversy did not diminish the film. Rather, it caused it to erupt. Dirty Harry generated $28.1 million in domestic box office revenue and spawned 4 sequels. Individuals who were dissatisfied with Vietnam, criminality, music, and a sense of powerlessness observed a raw reflection of themselves. A single phrase, frequently mispronounced, was repeated throughout the entire text, which pertained to the sensation of being fortunate. The film's significance was still being debated decades later. Dirty Harry was included in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress in 2012, precisely 41 years after its initial release. The explanation was straightforward and informative. These films are not selected due to their flawlessness. They are selected because they are indicative of the American identity at a specific juncture. The film that was previously referred to as fascist propaganda, has been preserved as a cultural document. Clint Eastwood was quietly constructing something else while all of that noise enveloped Dirty Harry. He directed his first film, Play Misty for Me, in 1971, the same year that the film made him a superstar. He captured the footage in his birthplace of Carmel, California, and demonstrated his ability to direct a narrative from behind the camera. He acquired leverage as a result of his success. He simultaneously directed and acted in films such as The Eiger Sanction, 1975, The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, and High Plains Drifter, 1972, throughout the 1970s. He transcended his role as a mere gunman and commenced an exploration of moral weight, consequence, and remorse by taking control of his actions. Cracks began to appear in the cowboy image. The years that followed the lengthy transition were well spent. Everything was transformed on March 29, 1993, at the 65th Academy Awards, when Unforgiven was released. Eastwood joined a select group of actors who had directed themselves to a victory, as the film won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. He was 62 years old. On a $14.40 $4 million budget, the film shattered the illusions of the Western genre that he had previously helped establish, earning $159.2 million worldwide. He dedicated it to Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, the individuals who had a significant impact on his early career. The message was unambiguous, even when he was defeated by Al Pacino for the title of Greatest Music Actor. Eastwood had altered his own legacy. A decade later, he repeated the action with even greater intensity. Million Dollar Baby dominated the 77th Academy Awards on February 27, 2005, claiming the following awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, and Music. The film, which cost $30 million to produce, grossed $216.8 million globally and outperformed its highly anticipated competitors. In the endeavor, Eastwood was involved in every aspect, including directing, producing, composing, and acting music. The eldest individual to receive the award at that time was Snorts, when he accepted Music Best Director at the age of 74 years and 272 days. It was released 12 years after Unforgiven, demonstrating that the previous success was not an accident. He was creating his most emotionally sophisticated work at a time when the majority of filmmakers were slowing down. The manner in which he labored was a contributing factor to his ability to continue working. Eastwood achieved widespread recognition for his ability to capture images in a single take, or occasionally two. Actors acquired the ability to stay prepared rapidly. There was minimal rehearsal and no interminable repetition. He was of the opinion that genuine conversations, music, occur only once, rather than after 50 attempts. Budgets, music, remained modest, schedules remained tight, and the set remained calm. The performances were loose and human, rather than engineered. His approach demonstrated that creativity could be enhanced through restraint, rather than being restricted. His personal life was equally complex when he was not in front of the camera. Clint Eastwood fathered a minimum of 8 children with 6 distinct women between 1954 and 1996, with a 42-year interval between the eldest and youngest. He was married to Maggie Johnson from 1953 to 1984, during which time several of those children were born. Kimber, a daughter born on June 17, 1964, was kept confidential for 25 years until it was publicly disclosed in July 1989. The truth was concealed as his fame increased, despite the fact that his name was on the birth certificate. Eastwood lived as if he were unmarried during the duration of his lengthy marriage. He acknowledged in 1963 that he intended to act as he pleased and referred to affairs as addictive. Maggie Johnson endured silently while women traversed his life on studio lots and acting classes. The strain was evident to those in their vicinity. The marriage was characterized as open by some. Music was described as causing visible agony by others. One liaison with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis commenced in 1959 and persisted for approximately 14 years. Kimber was the result. The marriage persisted, and the relationship was depicted in an open manner on the sets. Afterward, the explosive relationship with Sandra Lockcatch, which lasted 13 years and culminated in a $70 million lawsuit submitted on April 26, 1989, took place. Locke accused Eastwood of manipulation, coercion, and betrayal. She subsequently discovered that he had covertly fathered 2 children with another woman during the final years of their relationship. The case was resolved through a $1.5 million directing agreement that was subsequently exposed as a sham in court. A jury promptly concurred with Locke, and the case was ultimately resolved through an additional settlement. In January 2009, Clint Eastwood, at the age of 78, discreetly accomplished an act that Hollywood had previously declared impossible in the music industry. Snort's Gran Torino began modestly, debuting in only 84 theaters, almost as a test. On paper, the initial weekend's revenue of $271,720 appeared to be modest. Subsequently, occurred an alteration. Information disseminated. The film's wide-opening weekend was a resounding success, with $29 million in revenue generated. His previous personal record of $18.1 million from Space Cowboys was rendered obsolete by that single figure. The magnitude of the risk was what further underscored its impact. Gran Torino was constructed at a cost of $33 million. It had generated $269.9 million in worldwide revenue by the conclusion of its run, which was more than 11 times its budget. Eastwood achieved the most significant nationwide premiere of his career as both an actor and director, with an average of $10,337 at each theater. A tranquil narrative concerning an elderly Korean War veteran and his Hmong neighbors demonstrated that age was not a determining factor in their connection, which exceeded expectations. A few years later, this momentum was extended to an even more significant cultural moment. American Sniper did not penetrate theaters upon its release in January 2015. The door was breached by it. The film's opening weekend was the most successful for a drama, with a total of $105.3 million garnered in its first 4 days. The worldwide total reached $547.7 million by the conclusion of its run, with a budget ranging from $58 to $59 million. This discrepancy resulted in it being the second most profitable film of 2014, with an estimated profit of $243 million, trailing only Transformers: Age of Extinction. It surpassed Saving Private Ryan to become the highest-grossing war film of all time and became the 7th R-rated film to surpass the $500 million mark. Bradley Cooper's characterization of Navy SEAL Chris Kyle garnered 6 Oscar nominations, including the Best Picture award. Concurrently, the film provoked a backlash. Michael Moore, a filmmaker, publicly criticized the film during Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, portraying snipers as cowards, music, and condemning the language used toward Iraqis. It was impossible to disregard the film as praise and outrage converged. Eastwood had already demonstrated his ability to dominate headlines without a film just a few years prior. He delivered a surprising 12-minute speech at the Republican National Convention in Tampa, Florida on August 30, 2012, at the age of 82. He addressed a vacant chair that was intended to symbolize President Barack Obama, rather than delivering a polished address. A live audience of nearly 30 million individuals observed the event. The reaction was abrupt and severe. Roger Ebert described the music as pitiful and melancholy. Even Republican advisors privately described it as peculiar and peculiar. Eastwood refused to concede. Subsequently, he stated that his musical objective was to appeal to individuals in the middle rather than to those on the fringes. Jon Stewart aptly summarized the situation by teasing that the speech exposed a version of Obama that was only visible to Republicans, a version that was in stark contrast to reality. The event became even more surreal a month later. Eastwood acknowledged in September 2012 that the vacant chair was not intended. He clarified that a stool had been present in the area. Music was repeatedly inquired as to whether he desired to sit, and the concept hit him immediately. He desired contrast. He desired an unscripted performance in a room filled with rehearsed lines. He termed it unconventional. However, he asserted that the audience was enthusiastic. His objective was straightforward. Place the chair in the designated location and engage in a conversation with Obama regarding the unfulfilled promises. The reality that one of the most highly discussed political moments of the decade was the result of pure improvisation only served to enhance its legend. The White House responded within hours. On August 31st, 2012, President Obama's Twitter account published a photograph of him sitting confidently at the cabinet table, with 3 words written beneath it. "This seat is currently occupied." The tweet had been shared 51,400 times by Sunday afternoon, making it his second most retweeted post to that point. His tweet from May 2012, which advocated for same-sex marriage, was the only one that performed better. The simplicity was effective, as evidenced by the 61,500 retweets, without the need for argument or criticism. The narrative was reversed by the image, music, which transformed derision into a subtle demonstration of authority. Eastwood's personal life was proceeding in a similarly subdued manner, free from the attention of cameras and throngs. He purchased the Mission Ranch Hotel and Restaurant in Carmel by the Sea for approximately $5 million in 1986, thereby preventing the 22-acre property from being converted into condominiums. In the same year, he was elected mayor of Carmel, with a monthly salary of only $200. In 2014, nearly 3 decades later, he encountered Christina Sandera, music, while she was employed as an attendant at the establishment. She relocated to his residence within months. The first time the two were photographed together was in June 2014, when they exited a Whole Foods in Brentwood. Tabloids reported that the woman in the photo was a mystery. His children encountered her at an early age and promptly developed an affection for her, characterizing her as grounded and ordinary. The relationship was intentionally kept confidential. Their inaugural public appearance occurred on February 22, 2015, at the Dolby Theater during the 87th Academy Awards. That evening, American Sniper was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. In the subsequent years, Sandera appeared alongside Eastwood, music, at a few select premieres, such as The Mule in 2018, The 1517 to Paris in 2016, and Sully in 2016. Their final red carpet appearance together occurred in November 2019 at AFI Fest for Richard Jewell. She walked alongside him, her gray hair visible, and she made no attempt to conceal her age or reality. They subsequently vanished from public view once more. The music was abruptly interrupted by the silence in the most excruciating manner. Christina Sandera, music, passed away unexpectedly at a hospital in Monterey County, California, on July 18, 2024, just 2 days after her 61st birthday on July 16. The same day, Eastwood, who was then 94, published a statement in which he described her as a lovely, caring woman and said that he would miss her very much. He also spoke of her music. The death certificate subsequently verified that cardiac arrhythmia was the cause, with atherosclerotic coronary artery disease contributing. According to medical data, coronary artery disease is the cause of over 60% of cardiovascular fatalities and over 73% of sudden cardiac deaths in individuals over the age of 35. The timing exacerbated the severity of the loss. A birthday had recently transpired. There was no music, warning when a decade of cooperation concluded. Scott Eastwood, Eastwood's son, music, stated in January 2025 that his father was in excellent health and referred to him as a survivor months after the incident. He clarified that the family was characterized by resilience. "You refrain from lodging grievances. Whining is not your style. You simply execute." This perspective was influenced by his upbringing during the Great Depression and his experiences during World War II. However, no identity was ever confirmed. By late 2024, reports indicated that Eastwood had entered into another relationship quietly. Snorts. His workload was not entirely halted by mourning. Eastwood directed Juror 2, his 42nd film as a director, at the age of 94. In October 2024, the film was released at AFI Fest and received a 92% new score on Rotten Tomatoes from 74 reviews, surrounded by 4 reviews, and a Metacritic score of 73, which surprised critics. The domestic numbers were never disclosed, and Warner Brothers restricted the release to fewer than 50 theaters. Nevertheless, the film managed to generate $27.3 million in international revenue despite having a budget in the mid-30s million range. That performance significantly exceeded that of Crime Macho from 2021, which generated only $16.5 million globally. Juror 2 was regarded as his most significant musical composition since American Sniper by a significant number of critics. Then, confusion resurfaced. In May 2025, an Austrian newspaper published what appeared to be an interview in which Eastwood criticized modern Hollywood and purportedly was preparing another film just days before his 95th music birthday on May 31st. Significant media entities capitalized on the opportunity. On June 2, 2025, Eastwood terminated the interview, claiming that it was entirely fraudulent and that he had not conversed with any journalist. However, new allegations regarding music emerged in January 2026. According to industry insiders, he was once again in pre-production, as evidenced by his presence on the Warner Brothers lot, where he was observed silently working. No title, no cast, only speculations. The majority of critics concur that Juror 2 is a superior conclusion to Crime Macho, should it ultimately serve as the final chapter. Although it may not serve as a spectacular farewell, it demonstrates that Clint Eastwood was capable of producing a sharp, thought-provoking film at the age of 94. That alone feels like a final scene that was written entirely on his own terms, after more than 7 decades in the industry.